Welcome to the first video in the Slavic Witchcraft Series, where we're going to discuss everything from the gods, the goddesses, the mythological creatures, stories, magical practices, and how you can incorporate all of those into your modern Slavic practice. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the gods and goddesses of Slavic mythology. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anastasia and I'm a practicing Slavic witch, as well as a student of all things magic, manifestation, and the occult. As with many ancient religions, there just isn't a lot of information to go off of. There aren't a lot of written texts, there isn't a Bible, there aren't recorded prayers or rule books about what the Slavs believed in and how they were worshipping their gods. So instead, we kind of have to piece that together based on many different sources of information, some of which are more trustworthy than others. All of this is to say that the Slavic pantheon is not as clearly defined as, say, the Greek pantheon. One major piece of written text that a lot of Slavic pantheon information comes from is called the Primary Chronicle, which was published during the reign of Vladimir the Great. During that time, it was forbidden to practice Slavic paganism. And so what was chronicled about Slavic paganism, it's from a negative perspective. So things like that should be taken with a grain of salt. Of course, there are some pieces out there that are more positive. There's a chronicle called Novgorod First Chronicle that really goes into great detail about what the Slavs believed in as far as the creation of man and creation of life on Earth, and that has a more neutral tone or even a more positive tone when it comes to describing the gods and goddesses. Long story short, the accounts of Slavic religions and beliefs are fairly limited. So we are working with a limited amount of information and simply piecing it together to gain a better understanding of what our Slavic ancestors believed in. Based on some of these records, there are three main, most important gods and goddesses that the Slavs believed in. The first one, and probably the most important god, was named Perun. Perun was associated with lightning and thunder. He was also sort of in charge of keeping order in the world. He often fought against demons and darker energies. Perun was also believed to be the god of war and power. So similar to probably Thor, I would say, is how most Slavs viewed Perun. He was often represented as this big mighty eagle on top of the world tree, which is how the Slavs represented all of reality, is through this imagery of a large tree. Perun definitely ruled over the world of the living. He was the god in charge of the weather, the wars, law, nature, weapons, mountains. He was associated with a lot of these things and overall had this appearance of being a chief god. The second god in these three major gods group is Veles. Veles was almost viewed as the complete opposite of Perun. He was the god of the underworld and was seen as more of a trickster and somebody who can shapeshift. If Perun was in the sky and he was sort of hot and powerful and dry, then Veles was under the ground and he was wet and covered in dirt and slimy. There is this belief that the two of them would always fight about things and sort of come after each other. And anytime that lightning would strike somewhere, it was believed that the reason it was striking there is because Perun was trying to get Veles, and he was either hiding behind trees or buildings, or maybe he himself was shape-shifting into trees or buildings or animals or whatever. Whatever was being hit by lightning, it was believed that it was Veles. There are many myths surrounding Perun and Veles's contentious relationship. There's always these divine battles going on between them, with one of them trying to get away or tricking the other one. Ultimately, though, Veles is safe in one place, and that's the underworld. And that is because Perun believes that that's where Veles belongs, so he doesn't really go after him while he's there. So because of that, Veles has become truly the ruler of the underworld. He's also viewed as the god of cattle, shepherds, money, as well as dark magic. The third of the three major gods is actually a goddess. Her name is Mokosh. She is the goddess of women and fertility and health and potency. She's one of the very few female goddesses in the Slavic pantheon. So she was very significant, especially to women back in ancient times. You know, childbirth has always been a major part of people's lives, and back then it was very dangerous. So women would really rely on their relationship with Mokosh to hopefully bring peaceful and safe delivery of their children into the world. Today, Mokosh is still very well recognized and celebrated in cultures that, you know, have roots in Slavic mythology. In my own wedding, I had this lovely cloth depicting Mokosh right underneath the altar where my husband and I stood as we exchanged our vows. This is actually a pretty common practice. Supposedly, it's supposed to, you know, bring peace and love into the marriage, as well as, of course, fertility and babies and all that stuff. My mom got it for me. I think she really wanted grandkids. But yeah, if you take a closer look, you can see a lot of interesting imagery here. There are two female figurines. I think they're both supposed to be Mokosh. I'm not sure why there's two of them. In the middle, there is a loom type of thing because she is associated with weaving people's fates. So that was kind of part of her job. She's also holding what looks like a lot of wheat and plants, which I think is connected to her rule over fertility and abundance and rich harvests and things of that nature. There's also a lot of birds depicted here, which is another symbol of fertility for the ancient Slavs. So I thought that was really cool. I'm actually going to hang this up. I'm going to get it framed and hang it up because I haven't really done anything with it since my wedding, but yeah, I love it. In addition to the three main deities that we just discussed, there are tons, and I mean tons of other deities sprinkled throughout the ancient Slavic folklore. Some of them were region-based, some of them were more prevalent in certain parts of society than others, but overall, there are some noticeable themes throughout all of it, as with most ancient pagan religions. Pretty much everything in nature had its own god associated with it. So some really common ones that the Slavs believed in were Dazhbog. That is a god that's associated with the sun and wealth. Dazhbog literally comes from the word dash, which means to give, and bog means god. So he's a giving god. This was a god many people prayed to for a good harvest, for wealth, for abundance, for safety and warmth. He was highly celebrated in the summer months. Overall, very, very big in the harvest areas kind of god. Another important god is Svarog. He was in charge of fire and blacksmithing. He was also sometimes associated with war because the term svar could be rooted from arguments and confrontations. So he was sort of the fiery weapon god, kind of similar to Perun, but definitely less important to the Slavs on the hierarchy. Morena is another really interesting goddess in the Slavic mythology. She is the goddess of death, winter, witchcraft, harvest, and nightmares. She's definitely a very dark figure, but she's also very beautiful. People loved her and feared her. I think it makes sense that in the ancient times, people feared the season of winter. Nobody knew really how well it's going to go and whether you're going to make it through. So she was both revered and worshipped, but also very much feared. It was really up to her whether you and your village are going to make it through. She's often depicted with 6 arms, holding all these different symbolic things in her arms, from a serpent to a skull to a scythe. She's a very interesting character. She's one of my favorite goddesses to learn about. A few other lesser known gods that you've probably heard of are Chernobog and Belobog, which translates to black god and white god. Essentially, it was the god of darkness and the god of light. They sometimes played a part in people's beliefs. Other times, they were simply archetypes for Perun and Veles. So it's kind of hard to tell if they were individual deities that were separate or if they were just part of the same belief. There aren't a lot of written records about Belobog, the white god, god of light. However, Chernobog does appear in a lot of different places, and he is associated with, of course, darkness, bringing in famines, diseases, a very sort of dark and feared entity. And so Belobog was assumed to have existed as his opposite, although there aren't a ton of records to prove that he did exist. Those peoples who lived closer to the sea also believed and worshipped Stribog. This was a god of winds, and without winds, nothing can really happen on the sea. So he was often worshipped by sailors and people who traveled a lot by ships and boats. It was believed that every little wind current, no matter how big or small, was a child of this god. And so people who he chose to bless would usually have favorable winds, safe, great, fast voyages, versus those who he decided to curse or didn't like as much, could encounter dangerous storms and could lose their way, things of that nature. So he was also loved and feared at the same time, like most Slavic gods were. Another lesser-known god is Jarilo. He is the son of Perun, and he is supposed to represent sunshine, vegetation, harvest, kind of similar to some of the other archetypes we've already discussed. There is a very interesting myth surrounding Jarilo and Morena, the goddess of death that I discussed previously. Those two are both children of Perun, and they were supposedly both born on the same day, on New Year's. On the night of their birth, Jarilo was stolen from his cradle and brought down into the underworld by none other than Veles. And according to this myth, Jarilo does return back to the world of the living in the spring, during the spring solstice, which is why he brings with him the sun and the warmth and the fresh harvest. He essentially is what brings spring back into the living world. Now this is where it gets a little interesting. He meets his sister, Morena, and he seduces her. Now the ancient Slavs didn't see this as incestuous or problematic, which is probably a common theme among ancient religions. But anyways, he seduces her, and during the summer festival, early summer around Beltane on the traditional Western witches calendar, is when the Slavs would celebrate Ivan Kupala, which is a big summer fertility love celebration, and that is also the day that Jarilo and Morena united in marriage. That's right, he married his sister. Now, they were the children of a supreme god, so it makes sense that their marriage also signifies, happiness, warmth, abundance, fertility, joy. It was a really good thing. It is what brought summer and eventually a good harvest into the world. Now, in the winter months, Jarilo goes back to the underworld to his adopted father Veles to help him out. So that is why Morena remains as the goddess of winter and brings us through until the next spring, until he rejoins her. It's a cycle. Like many ancient beliefs, it was all cyclical. As you can see, ancient Slavic gods are very nature-based. They're very much tied to the seasons, to various natural elements like the fire or thunder or rain or water. Ancient concepts of harvest, fertility, sickness, illness, famines. Like most ancient people, they explained away natural phenomena with these gods and deities who warred among themselves and made decisions and were worshipped and either liked you or didn't like you, and they basically decided your fate. So, very similar to, I think, a lot of Nordic cultures, a lot of Baltic cultures, and even I think they share some similarities with the Greek pantheon. So this is it for today's video. As you probably know, there's tons of other mythological creatures such as Rusalkas, Baba Yaga, Kashe. I promise we will talk about all of those in the next video, which is going to be about Slavic mythological creatures. But as far as deities go, this is pretty much the extent of them. Like I said, there's really hundreds of them, but a lot of them are repetitions of each other from different regions, or simply very similar archetypes of the same deity. So I figured I'm not going to delve into that in this video, but as an overview, I hope you learned some interesting facts about Slavic gods and goddesses today. Let me know if you have a favorite. Leave it down in the comments. As you probably already figured, Morena is my favorite. I also really enjoy Mokosh. Anyways, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.